Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do.
But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long-snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy.
They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Not two, not three, not four, not five, not six, not seven. Hey, and when I say that, I really believe it. You know, I'm not just up here blowing smoke at these fans, because that's not what I'm about. I'm about Remember That Guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks. I'm one of your hosts, James. 1/3 of the RTG Big Three. Let's go ahead and check in with those other two.
Chris Bosch of RTG. I like to think I just kind of slide in nicely. I know my role. It's actually Diaz back with you, but we have a very special guest. He's actually the man that founded this podcast, the OG member. Please introduce yourself.
I can't believe you went Chris Bosch. I was so certain I was going to get to be Chris Bosch. But you know what? Screw it. I'll be Dwayne Wade, spelled the weird way. You know, the only one to be a part of all three Heat championships. So, you know, good on D Wade. Also,
Excuse me. Udonis Haslam.
Well, we're talking about the big three.
Sure. I feel like he needs to.
Haslam is still there. He did
retire. They did give him the chair last year.
No, he will just show up on the bench for every season going forward just because of who he is. Like, Udonis Haslam is part of the furniture at not FTX Arena, whatever it is now, Kasaya or something. Like, if you bought the team today, you would also get Udonis Haslam as part of the package.
It is not a Miami Heat season until Udonis Haslam threatens to slap the shit out of the best player on the team.
Do you think when they have him come on to be a coach, because, like, obviously, is he going to insist on still taking a roster spot as a coach? Like, are they just going to be hamstrung with one less player forever if they want Haslam?
They'll find a way to give him a two-way. They'll give him a two-way.
No, here's what it is. There's going to be... It's going to be February, and the Heat are going to be riddled with injuries, and they're just going to turn to Udonis, and they're going to say, "But you think you can give us like 12 minutes? That's all we need. We just need 12."
Bam's going to miss 4 games. We just need some spot minutes.
You can fight somebody and get ejected in the first quarter each game if you want, but you just need to be on the floor for some minutes.
Well,
question: was that an era of success? Because they did only end up with 2, but it also only lasted 4 years.
I mean, he started everything off saying not 2. So I think it is like...
I feel like it's a failure.
Not 2.
I mean, you can look at it that way, but you can also just look at it as they made the finals every year and they won half of the championships that they played in. Like, were they just going to flame out? Probably. It seemed like that team was getting to its last legs in the final year. But 50% success rate, if your only definition of success is winning the championship, I think it's pretty successful.
Do you think if Chris Bosch didn't get the blood clots, LeBron would have stayed?
Well, there was a year there when Bosch was still playing when he was in Cleveland, wasn't there? I'm pretty sure there was. We have technology.
I don't know who did the mocap for the Velociraptors in the most recent Jurassic World movies, but I feel like they could have just gotten them to do mocap for Chris Bosch for a little bit.
Oh, no, you're right, Diaz. He got the blood clots that next year. Sorry,
because I remember, I thought there was a year where it was like, hey, this D-Wade Bosch thing might be something to it.
That was the next year after LeBron went back to Cleveland. But again, apologies, James, for cutting you off.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to say Chris Bosch is a Velociraptor. Well, I just always want to say Chris Bosch is a Velociraptor. But you know what else I always want? Whatever it is that's making memories for the two of you.
So I'll go first because I have something a little unconventional. So it's important that in the process of making memories, we also don't forget things that have been done or things that have been said by certain athletes. It's been very quiet for a while on the Kyrie Irving front as he's awaiting to get his next big contract before he surely will change his ways for good now. This is not just a phase where Kyrie Irving is done saying batshit insane things. But I also coincidentally found a link today to a great website. It has a fun game, and I'd love to play it with you two right now. It's called Did Kyrie Say It?
Beautiful. We
I
need
would love
more
to play
games
it.
on this show.
I'm down to play it, but also didn't Kyrie sign his deal like 2 days ago?
Well, then it's just a matter of time until Kyrie
I
says
think he
something
got,
like one of the
like
things.
42 million a year for 3 years. Something like that.
He almost certainly has signed it by the time this episode comes out, so we'll just cover Diaz's ass that way.
There we go. Perfect. So, first question for Did Kyrie Say It? The first quote, I should say. Jesus could be in front of me, and I'll probably still shoot. Was it A, Kyle Kuzma, B, Kyrie Irving, C, Stephen Curry, or D, Dylan Brooks?
That
It's A
sounds
or
like a
B.
Kuzma thing.
Yeah, it's definitely A or B.
Feels
We'll
like
go
Kuzma.
Kuzma. It was Kyle Kuzma.
Yes.
All right.
So we're 1 for 1. Kyrie, maybe a little more together than we thought. The second quote. One thing that somebody told me is that leadership is a lonely role. Some people can do it and some people can't. Was it A, Kyrie Irving, B, Donald Trump, C, Jaylen Brown, or D, Soulja Boy?
I'm almost certain that one's Kyrie Irving.
I think that's Kyrie. I would
I
have
think
loved
it's
it to
him
be
when he
Soulja
was
Boy,
in
but I'm pretty sure that was
Boston
Kyrie.
specifically.
This was Kyrie Irving. He famously said this after he demanded a trade away from LeBron.
Yep.
And then when he realized he needed to be the leader for the Celtics,
When he was like, oh shit, this is what it's like being in charge of players that are younger than me?
wasn't a big fan of it. The third question. Absolutely every single one of my actions is intentional. Divine purpose. If your day is full of mindless action, you act without thought. Was this A, Andrew Tate, B, Light Yagami, C, Kyrie Irving, or D, was this just ChatGPT?
I'm torn between A and C. It does feel like some Andrew Tate shit because he definitely took a turn to God approach while he was in the Romanian prison. I'm
Xavier?
going Andrew Tate.
I just because you went Death Note, I don't care if it's right, but I just want to say that my answer is Light Yagami.
Light Yagami. It was not. Andrew Tate, it was.
Fucking killing it in this game, man.
Andrew Tate wishes he could be Light Yagami.
So only one of these three quotes by Kyrie so far. The fourth quote, being alone is more painful than getting hurt. Was this A, Kanye West, B, Monkey D. Luffy, C, most recent inductee to the Hall of Guy, Mike Tyson, or D, Kyrie Irving?
I need to get your anime pronunciation up a notch for the next time we do this.
I think it's at exactly the notch I want it to be, Xavier.
I'm playing with house money. I'm going to say this one's Kyrie.
I'll also
Kyrie,
go with Kyrie.
Well, this is whoever guy's name I said wrong, Xavier. Monkey
It's
D.
Luffy?
Luffy. Monkey D. Luffy.
Well, I mean, it makes
The name
sense.
of the treasure is One Piece.
Luffy's whole thing is, his crew, his family. So, I mean, I've watched 1,064 episodes. I can't remember every quote he said.
Monkey D. Luffy and Dom Toretto, indistinguishable people.
You know what? As someone who loves both One Piece and Fast and Furious, I am all for that comparison.
All right, Diaz, bring us home, baby.
Final quote we'll go with. Nobody is hijacking this voice. See if they play this on their TV channels and if they play this actual truth somewhere before you start talking about me and what I am doing with my life. Was this A, Kanye West, B, Elon Musk, C, Kyrie Irving, or D, Dylan Brooks?
It's not. I've already forgotten what B is because I immediately said that's not it. It's A, C, or D.
It's either I feel like it's either Kanye or Kyrie, but and this could be just a fucking red
There's
herring.
an uncomfortable amount of overlap between Kanye and Kyrie the more I think about this.
I feel like it's Kanye, but because Kyrie's only been one of the answers so far, I'm just gonna go with Kyrie.
Okay, word.
Sometimes you got to play the game within the game, and that's why you're both exactly right. That is a Kyrie Irving quote. Again, just to cover that one in its entire beauty, nobody is hijacking this voice. See if they play this on their TV channels, and if they play this actual truth somewhere before you start talking about me and what I'm doing with my life.
Now this is post or flat Earth, right? This is like immediately after he said flat Earth stuff.
I do believe so. I gotta say, reading that was hard because it makes so little sense. It was hard to see which words to put emphasis on.
Yeah, like it's not syntax.
It's nonsensical, but very happy both of you were able to play this game with me. Sometimes we forget just because people haven't said crazy things in a long time that they are crazy. Not to diminish anybody who is dealing with any mental health issues, but Kyrie Irving says ridiculous things, and we will give him ridicule on this podcast.
We weren't sure what controversy that last one was tied to about Kyrie, which says everything I think we need to say. Anything else for you this week, Diaz?
Annapolis Blues won 1-0. There was a very questionable goal that was whistled off for their opponent in the most recent game. We had a very tight angle down the line for offside on our broadcast. It was inconclusive. It was very close. The call did go Annapolis' way, and they remain undefeated on the season.
Home cooking, baby.
He has made some Buffalo Wild Wings calls to make sure that ref had the right ruling.
Lord help me if I ever get access to an official video review system. It would not go well for anybody. It would not go well, especially if it's a Philadelphia team. Many biases will be uncovered.
Xavier, is anything going well for you right now?
Yeah, I got a couple things. There was one thing that's a little more sad but important I wanted to bring up, so I'll go with that first. And that's a story about Heather Anderson, who was a Australian rules football player, and before that had been a rugby player and in the military. She had unfortunately taken her own life after Australian football season a couple of years ago. And she just became the first female athlete to have been diagnosed posthumously with CTE. And the director of the research lab that did the review of her brain said that she's the first, but she's not the last, and that there were multiple CTE lesions as well as abnormalities, and it was indistinguishable from the dozens of male cases he's seen. I think it's important, and the researchers also think it's important, and Heather Anderson's father thinks it's important that people be aware that CTE can affect anyone in contact sports, not just men. So it's important to be aware of the risks. It is, I don't want to say historic because that feels too positive for what it is, but it is important development in our understanding of the brain and what contact sports can do. That was sad,
on the
though.
bright side, yeah.
Yeah, that was sad though. So let's turn to something stupid. You know Neymar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he just got fined $3 million by Brazilian authorities for breaching local environmental regulations. Do you want to know why?
Did he chop down some of the rainforest to build a pool?
I'm going to say
No.
too much hairspray. Too much hairspray.
It's even worse than what you said, James. He paid a company $25,000 to illegally divert a river to create his own artificial lake at his mansion.
I was closer than I should have been. I was just doing a funny dipshit joke, and it was not that far off.
Yeah, he created an artificial lake, and the company that built it put a statement on Instagram saying it would seek the necessary permitting and work with the government to abide by the regulations. After they got fined for doing illegal things to give this millionaire his own personal lake.
Also, I'm sorry, what fucking regulations are there about a personal lake? You're going to tell me the government has planned for this eventuality?
I think it's more about diverting the river and fucking over everybody else, but yeah, he have an aerial view of his house because apparently he had fun over the past couple months building himself a full-sized go-kart course on one side and a lake on the other.
People got too much money.
Yeah, that's how you know you have too much money. But that one, funny one to kind of lighten the mood. And then the last one, I am ecstatic about Arsenal right now because of a couple different reasons. First, start with the men. It looks like they're about to finalize the signings of Declan Rice for a club record fee and also a near British record, and also sign Jurrien Timber from Ajax in defense. And I'm very excited about them getting their work done early. But the big thing I'm excited about is the women's team, who I've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast. They just announced the signing of Alessia Russo, who is the starting striker for the English women's national team. They wanted her so badly that in January, they sent 2 world record bids to Manchester United to sign her. But United was like, no, we're not going to sell this player during the season. So instead, her contract expired and Arsenal signed her on a free instead of giving Manchester United world record money for her. And so now they have the money and the striker. And,
if only the Knicks had done that with Carmelo Anthony for you, Xavier.
Yeah. If only they thought, hey, this guy actively wants to come play for us.
And will be a free agent in a couple months.
Yeah, and instead we'll trade all of our assets, even if Timofey Mozgov did end up being crap. But, regardless, we're not talking about the Knicks. We're talking about both Arsenal men and Arsenal women doing fantastic business so far. Diaz, I'm sure, is excited about Newcastle's record transfer with Sandro Tonali. Everyone's already making jokes, though, about how he's going to die in Newcastle winter.
Listen, it's not Sandro Tonali, it's Sandro Tunali. He is gonna fit right in.
Pretty good.
Gonna fit right in the Northeast. No, I love it. And he can just tell all his friends and family that Juventus moved to England, and he can still be an Italian hero too.
Well, soccer is making both me and Diaz happy, but what about you, James? What's making you happy?
I mean, it's not soccer, so that is fair. Well, hey, women's teams. There's going to be a Canadian-American. That's exciting. Billie Jean King basically just bought out both of the leagues that kind of existed in conflict with another, PHF and PWHPA. If you want to listen to smart people talk about this, I highly recommend a show, The Gist of It. It is a very female-focused sports show, and they did a great download of what to think about for the upcoming year of putting this in place. But the one thing I want to say is Philadelphia is officially a city under consideration. Diaz and Xavier, this could be the first team the two of you get to share. I will go in on the Philadelphia hockey teams that we as a group can have one team that we cumulatively give a shit about.
We would have to be there at opening day.
Absolutely. Fuck yeah.
100%. Not even a question.
But that's all I have for that. I mostly want to talk about a couple things going on in endurance sports. One of them is one I just learned about. This is the world's toughest row putting on the Great Pacific Challenge. This is a 2,800 mile rowboat race across the Pacific Ocean. Not even the entire Pacific Ocean. First off, hey, Polynesians did this thousands of years ago, but this is not the entire Pacific Ocean. It's from Monterey in California to Hawaii. It is 2,800 miles, and it started on June 12th this year. It is probably going to wrap up sometime within the next couple days after this episode releases. And it is almost certainly going to wrap up when one team that is currently just destroying the rest of the field. That team is Team Kiwi Fondue. They are currently ahead by 100 nautical miles. They're called Team Kiwi Fondue because a number of them have roots in Switzerland. Two of them are Swiss born. They also have some roots in New Zealand. So it's a bit on that, but also their logo is a piece of kiwi being dipped in cheese fondue with a trident speared through it. So they're leaning into it a little bit.
That's phenomenal.
And yeah, they're just 100 nautical miles, which is about 110, 115 miles clear of the next closest competitor. It's a 2 hour on, 2 hour off cycle that they've just been doing at this point for nearly 28 days. And they expect, they banked about 35 altogether. They are close to the fastest ever in a race competition. The male record is just over 30 days, but they could feasibly get the closest in a head-to-head thing, which I believe is just under 40. And they did one of the amazing things where, they go north initially to dodge a storm and everyone's like, oh, this is crazy. But it was a one step backward to take two steps forward kind of thing. So that's great. I learned about it. I'll put some links in the Discord later and everyone can follow those in the final days after this comes out. But of course, the most important endurance sport other than the Iditarod is happening right now. And that is the Tour de France. Will be in its 10th day when this comes out. It's very easy. Start on July 1st. It ends on July 23rd. There are 23 stages. Super easy to keep track. And it's been a phenomenal one so far. They just entered the Pyrenees today that we record this. But I want to turn back to day one. A little bit of info coming into this. There are two favorites. And by that, I mean there's one guy that won last year, Jonas Vingegaard, who's a top competitor. And then there's the new prodigy in the sport who won the two previous and still finished second last year. And also during these 3 years has won the youth jersey all 3 times because he's not just been qualified to beat the entire field. He's also still essentially been in the lower classification age-wise. This is Slovenia's Tadej Pogačar. He was scouted as this 13-year-old because this coach went and saw a bunch of like youth cycling, and he was one of the youngest of the pack, and he sees him trailing just behind the massive peloton of like all the rest of the much older teenagers. Because the coach is like, how are you letting this 13-year-old kid get like beaten up like this? He's like, oh no, that 13-year-old's about to lap the group. So Tadej Pogačar, absolute maniac. He's on the UAE team and just got wrist surgery a couple months ago coming into the tour. So all eyes were on him and his teammate Adam Yates on day one. And this is one of like the best day ones of the tour I have ever watched. So not only was Tadej Pogačar the youth white jersey winner for the last 3 years, in 2016, Adam Yates, his teammate from the UK, was also the white jersey winner. It's two very like strong young guys. They're ahead of the whole pack. Yates is breaking wind for Pogačar, who's drafting right behind him. And all of a sudden, this other young rider, the guy who won the 2017 white jersey, comes up on him. Different team this time. The tours, more than even just normal biking, are absolutely a team sport. And so Yates being in first here does not negate that Pogačar is their golden child. But when this guy comes up on the two of them and starts to pull ahead, radio team tells Yates, look, it's okay. You got to go forward with him. You got to maintain the team's position today. And so he's neck and neck with this one other rider the whole way down the stretch, like having to leave his teammate behind, who still finished in, I think, third or fourth after the first day. And finally, at the end of it, Yates crosses the finish line. And then shortly thereafter, Yates crosses the finish line. Because the other thing I didn't mention is that this other guy is his identical twin brother, Simon Yates, who plays for another team. They won back-to-back white jerseys. And out of nowhere, as he's racing with like Pogačar, the greatest cyclist in the world, his twin brother comes up and the radio's like, look, man, we get it. Go have this like beautiful movie moment with your twin brother and win this for the team, which he did. And just fucking incredible. Shouts to the Yates brothers. Shouts to the Yates stock. Papa and Mama Yates. Good job. That's the tour. That is the world's toughest Rail Great Pacific Challenge, and that's what's making memories for me today.
I mean, that's a pretty strong argument for nature over nurture. The Sedins, I guess, had like a level of telepathy that was really impressive.
Well, and they played off one another. Like part of what made them great was specifically playing together.
Right. But I mean, this is just simply I made pedal strokes and you made pedal strokes over an extremely large distance. And like, what was the final margin? Like, was it more than a couple
seconds? It was not a massive margin by any stretch.
So yeah, remarkable stuff. I can't imagine being the brother that came in second. I would be so fucking pissed for the rest of my life.
I mean, so they're like Adam Yates, I believe, was the first ever when he won the white jersey, British cyclist to win the white jersey, and then Simon was the second. So, like, they are both accomplished. They've both won plenty of smaller races. Adam is absolutely there to get Pogačar to the finish line. But yeah, it's been a really good tour, and you've got like 2 more weeks to watch it when you're listening to this on Monday. So like, dude, check out some tour. It's so good. But that is not why we have convened the Tribunal today, after all. Because while Adam and Simon Yates are certainly mates, they're not the kind of mates that we are concerned with this week. I got the opportunity to select this category, and I wanted to leave a little open-end to you guys. I picked a phrase that has been rattling around my head with the guy that I want to bring up. This is admittedly one of those categories. There's like, what's the thing that interests me about the guy that I want to discuss? And so I presented you all with the category running mates, because I wanted to think about that person that is there in support, that is necessary, who will never have top billing, just like exclusively is there to get someone else across the finish line. And what it took me to the last decade plus of the NBA, it's been defined by really 2 finals dynasties, we'll say. One of them, of course, is the Golden State Warriors, and the other one is
LeBron James.
Now,
well played.
Now, with Golden State, like the players at the periphery changed a bunch of times. You went from like Bogut, Barnes, Livingston to KD, Pat McCaw, JaVale McGee, Jordan Poole, Wiggins, all of them. But there is a team at the middle still. There's a core 4 in all of the championships of Curry, Clay, Draymond, and Iguodala. With LeBron, not only is it different because it is centered around one player, but it is centered around 2 different franchises. And so, sure, he's got, the 4 finals appearances with a number of guys. He's got it with Wade, he's got it with Bosh, he's got it with Love. But largely LeBron is the constant, and there's a lot more shifting in the supporting cast. That is, with one exception, a guy who played in 7 of those 8 straight finals, LeBron's most consistent championship teammate, and my guy today, James Jones. Before I start with James Jones, one quick note. He is one of 17 athletes named James Jones who have a Wikipedia page, and there are 3 of them in basketball.
It would be perfect for the topic that I'll pick if I win.
I mean, he's perfect for this topic, I think, too. He's the youngest of those Hoopers. He is born on October 4th, 1980 in Miami, Florida, a shining beacon of American virtues today, as it was at this time when he went to American High School, founded in 1976 with colors red, white, and blue, and team mascot, the Patriots.
At least it's committed to the bid.
Can we at least go Eagles and just give me like a big bald eagle?
No, man. They were explicitly made so that Ron DeSantis someday would have a raging hard on talking about this school. And there's been a number of illustrious players. James Jones is up there in terms of the illustrious alumni. A couple I do want to highlight. Olivier Vernon and Darrell Williams will both go on to the NFL after both playing at UMiami. Vernon will even play for the Miami Dolphins. One other guy, a rapper by the name of Smoke Perp. It was a song called Tesla with Lil Pump. No, I did not listen to it. No, I will never listen to it. But this has been a small bit of information about Smoke Perp. That's perp that ends in 2 Ps. Anyway, Jones is a star at American High School. He's team MVP both his junior and senior years. Senior, he's like first team All-State, All-Dade County. He is Miami Herald's Boys Basketball Player of the Year, and he is a finalist for their Scholar Athlete of the Year. He has 16 blocks in one game his senior year, and he's averaging 6 blocks per game, but he is still a massive scorer largely. 25.2 points, 12 rebounds, and 2.5 assists to go with those blocks. So he is a highly touted high school recruit, much like Olivier Vernon, much like Darrell Williams, much like his aunt, Lisa Jones, who played basketball for this team. He decides that it is all about the U. He goes to UMiami, where in his freshman year, he plays in every game. He comes off the bench, but he plays in every game. They make it all the way to the Sweet 16. That is the peak team-wise for him with the Hurricanes. But he has 3 straight seasons after this of starting every game, every year. By the time he's a senior, he's a National Honor Society. He's going to get his degree in finance. He is 3rd team All Big East that year. And he's got like a diverse game too. Sophomore year in particular, he starts to develop like a really good outside shot, leads the team in 3-point percentage. But then also by the time that he's a senior, he's grown to 6'8". So like that's still not huge in professional basketball standards, but now he's basically leading the team in blocks and rebounds in addition to being their 3-point specialist. So he is a pretty nice pedigree as he comes out of college. And that brings us to an all-timer in the 2003 NBA draft. Do you guys know the top 5 of the 2003 NBA draft?
LeBron, Darko, Melo, D-Wade, Bosh.
There you go. That's it. That is exactly it. Darko Milicic.
That's the only top 5 draft that I could name. I think any basketball fan could name that one. No.
Well, I think the one thing I just want to say, probably the only time we'll ever talk about Darko Milicic on this podcast.
It doesn't necessarily seem true.
True, but Detroit was probably about the worst situation for a guy like him to go to, because him coming over from Europe, especially at that time as a big man, he was going to need a couple years to adjust. And instead, he immediately goes to Detroit, where, I mean, they're competing for a championship. And like I make that point to then say there's some people that always say, well, if Carmelo went to Detroit, then they would have really been a dynasty. It's like, look, if Carmelo goes to Detroit, then Larry Brown is fed up with his shit 2 weeks into the season. He maybe never becomes anybody. Meanwhile, Darko Milicic goes to a Nuggets team with no expectations, and he's allowed to take time to develop. Maybe they get their Eastern European center wonderkind 2 decades ahead of time. So one of the great what ifs. But just to say Darko Milicic didn't suck, there was just a weird situation around him.
Hey, he got his Champions Medal, and now he's a farmer, so...
I mean, hey, we'll have plenty to say about Detroit in a second, but let's real quick touch on this draft just a tiny bit more, because it's not just the top 5. You got David West at 18. You got Boris Diaw at 21. You got Kendrick Perkins at 27. We got Luke Walton, Jerome Beasley, Zaza Pachulia, Matt Bonner, Mo Williams, Kyle Korver, and in the middle of all of this, we have the Indiana Pacers with the 49th overall pick, James Jones. Rookie year, he has just a slew of injuries. He plays literally just 26 minutes across 6 games his rookie season. So basically doesn't get to see any action. And the team ends up losing in the Eastern Conference Finals to those Detroit Pistons. And then we get to his sophomore year, and it is November 19th, 2004. Do you guys know what happens on November 19th, 2004?
There
Mouse in the
was
Palace.
There is a rematch of those Eastern Conference Finals between the Detroit Pistons and the Indiana Pacers. And there's some anger between the two teams. So with 46 seconds or so left, Ron Artest shoves Ben Wallace a little bit. Ben Wallace shoves back. They're separated. And then a cup is thrown at Ron Artest while the players are still being dealt with in like a bad player fight, but just a player fight. And once that cup's thrown, Ron Artest decides, all right, that's what's happening now. And so he goes into the stands to try and find that fan, gets the wrong guy, punches some other guys, and then shit just goes sideways. They end up getting 296 total games suspended for all players involved. Over $11 million in salary is forfeited by these guys. And here's one other thing that happens. All of a sudden, Indiana's got to fill a lot of minutes that can't be taken by Steven Jackson and Ron Artest. And you know who's there? James Jones, baby. Jones starts the next night. It is his first career start at home versus Orlando. He plays 43 minutes in that first game. And a lot of the guys just have like a 1-game suspension. So he's eating up a lot then. But over the next 49, he's going to start 24 of the games as the team slowly gets back to full strength. You know, he takes a little bit of a seat later on. During that 49-game stretch, 18.9 minutes played, 5.1 points, 2.5 rebounds, but 37.8% from three. Finishes the season 39.8. That's 25th in the league and number 1 on the Pacers, who do then lose in the second round of the playoffs, once again to the Pistons.
That's just a brutal calendar year for everybody in Indiana not named James Jones.
Yeah, and James Jones gets out of Indiana after this because Phoenix really liked what they saw in his limited time. GM Larry Bird works out a sign and trade on the Pacers end, and the Suns grab him for just a 2008 second rounder. He has an identical 24 starts in their 75 games the next year, but he's up to 23.6 minutes. He's averaging around 9 points, 3-point shooting still right around 37%. And this is like a good Suns team. They got MVP Steve Nash. They got Amari Stoudemire. They got Boris Diaw sometimes when he feels like it. They have our beloved Brian Grant on this team. And the lights out shooter just gets better and better. The next season, he has the season's longest consecutive free throw streak, 45 consecutive over 3 months. So he's like had this solid time with Phoenix, but they're starting to see the end of the 7 seconds or less Suns coming. And so they decide to go in a different direction. They trade him and Rudy Fernandez to Portland. Portland falls hard for James Jones. The Portland fans love him. He shoots 44 from 3 now. They are aghast when he does not make the 3-point shooting contest this year, which he chalks up to, hey, I have a very forgettable name. And not to rag on James Jones or anything, but he is one of 17 Wikipedia players with the name James Jones. So, yeah, it is a kind of forgettable name. So he's on this team. They finished 41-41. It's his first time on a team that doesn't make the playoffs or doesn't have a winning record. And fun fact about James Jones, just to give a little bit of spoiler, that's the last time that'll ever happen for him. When he hits free agency, Portland's not offering as much as he can get elsewhere. And so we have a beautiful homecoming as James Jones signs with his hometown Miami Heat. Going to end up signing for $23.2 million over 5 years. And almost immediately, all of those injuries and illnesses from his rookie season come roaring right back. Over the next 2 years, he only plays 76 games. And particularly in that second one, more and more of them end up being DMP CDs. And it's not looking great for James Jones. And only those first 2 years were guaranteed. So they do cut him, but they love him. He's got the Heat culture ethos. He is this hard-nosed, prototypical, like 3-and-D guy, even before that's fully kind of caught on as a thing. So they do offer him for the 2010-2011 season, the veteran minimum. Part of the reason they're offering this restructured contract is because the Miami Heat also did need to clear some money off the books this offseason. That is because James Jones is not the only member of the 2003 draft class that's doing pretty well. 3 of those top 5, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh, can all sign wherever they so please. And so Wade, Bosh, Jones, and also LeBron James sign in 2010 with the Miami Heat, beginning the Heatles era. And I'm going to posit to you the 4th Heatle is none other than James Jones.
Because he signed a contract in that offseason, I certainly get the argument. But back to your earlier point, I feel like we got to honor Udonis.
Udonis is George Martin. Udonis is the producer, twisting the knobs, getting the instrumentalists on the side, aka all the role players that are not these four, to kind of get with the program and stuff. Udonis Haslam is George Martin, and Shaq is Pete Best.
Wait, who was? Oh, okay. I was going to say who was the fifth guy?
Shaq is Pete Best.
Okay.
Anyway, so it's 2010, 2011. James Jones, healthy as can be. He leads the team with 81 games, and he does all the little things. He drains threes, leads the team with 123 of them with 42.9%. That is 7th in the league this year. He takes charges, leads the team with 29 of those, and he protects the ball. In that season, his turnover rate is 5.27 per 100 possessions, which was the second lowest ever at the time that he recorded it, behind his 2005-2006 season. These are 5th and 4th all time now. But James Jones takes care of the rock. In the playoffs, he actually goes up from 19 minutes a game to 23 minutes a game. And they do reach the finals, first ever time, that being James Jones reached the finals for the first ever time. Most of the other players that are important to this have reached it at some point. Chris Bosh for the first, I guess, also. That being said, maybe the fact that he was playing 23 minutes a game did not bode well for the Heat, who do eventually lose to Dirk and the Mavs in those finals. We've got our first.
That's still my favorite championship team of the past 15 to 20 years, maybe.
Well, because it was just a perfect coalescence of so many different good to great players that were just slightly post-prime, where they weren't at their peaks, but they were still good enough to compete. Because you had Dirk, you had Jason Terry, you had Jason Kidd, you had Tyson Chandler, Peja Stojakovic was on that team.
Sean Marion.
I would say that's probably the closest to the 2004 Pistons in terms of if we were ranking the teams in being owned by a single gravitational star-ness.
The reason I have the Mavs above them is because, one, I think they're more likable than those Pistons, but also two,
sure. We just talked about when the Pistons got charged for assault along with some of the Pacers.
Two, after that Pistons win, that felt like the catalyst for the new super team era with those Celtics. So Dirk was really the first, and depending on how you consider Jamal Murray, the only one star with good supporting cast around him since then.
Also, but let it just be said, because my Boricuaness will not forgive me if I do not mention 2011 NBA champion JJ Barea.
Shout-outs JJ Barea. And shout-outs to our own JJ, James Jones, who does get a little bit of a raise this next season as we go into 2011, 2012. So now he's going to go from that vet minimum to a 3-year, $4.5 million deal, again with Miami. His minutes are going to start to look a little bit more like a veteran presence now. But he does finally get a spot in the three-point shootout this year, finishing third place champion.
Love it.
Of course, he and James now in their second trip together. By the way, I'm going to start referring to them as their celebrity couple name, LeBron James Jones. Gets their first title over OKC. Beautiful. We go to the next year. And the DNP CDs do grow a little bit for James Jones. He's going from 15 of those games sitting to 43 altogether. But he still has a valued piece of the team's soul in him. And he is a valued piece of their third straight run. This time, a different three-point specialist does some stuff towards the end of the finals. And, the Heat win, yada, yada, yada. But James Jones is now a two-time champion. Sorry, LeBron James Jones is now a two-time champion. The next season, they don't know as I talk about them here in the past tense, but we know it's the final year of the Heat as we enter 2013, 2014. James Jones only plays in 20 games this year. He does have 6 starts in those, but he only plays 30 total minutes in 8 games in the playoffs. That being said, he does play in those playoffs, and LeBron James Jones does make a 4th straight trip to the finals, and the San Antonio Spurs whoop their fucking asses. So now we enter another kind of big earth-shaking offseason. LeBron James makes another very large capital D decision, and he decides to leave Miami for his beloved hometown team, Cleveland Cavaliers. He's not interested in taking a break from finals trips. Kyrie is all well and good, but he immediately says, all right, we got to get rid of this Anthony Bennett, Andrew Wiggins guy. Give me that K-Love. And also, another thing, gonna need my buddy James Jones to leave his beloved hometown team, Miami Heat, and come help me. I need James Jones in order to continue my finals runs. He says this. James Jones absolutely agrees and signs a contract with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And his regular season looks about the same as it did in Miami. About 11 minutes a game, 4 points. Still 36 from 3, man. He's still money from the arc. They get to the playoffs, and there are some injuries to the Cleveland Cavaliers, which means that James Jones has to step up again, much like he did in that first run for the Heat. There's a lot of echoes here. It echoes even more so when they make it, LeBron James Jones, that is, to their 5th straight finals, the first with this team, and then they do lose in the finals, as they did the first time with the Heat. But the 5th straight trip has entered LeBron James Jones into the top 10 in consecutive finals appearances. And they are not done yet. The next year, Cavaliers reload at the trade deadline, and they get set to make another trip. This is going to be the second for the Cavs. But LeBron James Jones, they're now in their 6th finals. That is 7th all time. And in this rematch with the Warriors, the 73-win Warriors, we know that we have the Draymond nut shot. We know we have the block. We know we have the shot by Kyrie Irving. And Cleveland wins its first title in 52 years, thanks in no small part to the combined efforts of LeBron James Jones.
You're having too much fun with that.
And sure, did James Jones only play 55 minutes that year compared to 311 the year before in the playoffs? Yeah, absolutely. But you know who Kevin Love made sure to shout out as his inspiration during the parade? James Jones. You know who LeBron said was his favorite player of all time? That is a quote from a December ESPN article. James Jones. And you know who, on August 3rd, 2016, re-signed with the Cavs for one more run? That's right, it's James motherfucking Jones.
You know what? I love the idea. Like, this is now canon in my head that James Jones was actually just the weed man for all these teams. And that's why everyone loved him.
See, halfway through this, I started picturing James Jones as James Earl Jones, just playing basketball. So now we both have very different views of all of this in our head. It's just Darth Vader hooping. For the 3rd straight year, the Cavs make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. They play the Celtics, which I want to mention because when they beat the Celtics, LeBron James Jones became the only non-Celtics to ever make it to 7 straight finals. For the 3rd time, they face the Warriors. This time, the Warriors have Kevin Durant. It is not as close. Maybe that's because Kevin Durant still had that chip on his shoulder from when LeBron James Jones beat them back in 2012. And so they do kind of beat the shit out of him. And the Warriors do win the rubber match. But I do want to rewind just a little bit to the game before they win. June 9th, 6-9, nice. 2017, James Jones is inserted into the game for the final 2 minutes of what will eventually be a 137-116 Cavaliers win. It's the last win of the season for him. He records absolutely no stats, but he does exit to some applause from the home crowd. That is the final game for James Jones. He does not re-sign with Cleveland. He does not get the 8th trip LeBron gets. They've separated amicably now, but it is LeBron James and James Jones. In 14 seasons, James Jones played 709 games, never averaged double-digit points, but still was a career 40% shooter from 3 and mid-range. Very hard-nosed, like 4 rebounds per 36, which for like a mid-size 2-3 wing, pretty fucking impressive. And you know what? He made $25 million in the NBA. As of now, that 7 straight is still tied for 6th most all-time with Bob Cousy and KC Jones. And by the way, those two are not even the highest-ranked person with the last name Jones in this list. I do feel for him a little bit on the name. We don't have to feel too bad, though, because he very quickly gets a second career. His retirement is basically announced when he gets the job as a member of the Phoenix front office. Like, oh, well, I guess you can't do that and play at the same time. So joins on with the team that found him as a diamond in the rough, maybe thinking he'll help them do the same. After the Suns fuck up everything with the Koskarov and DeAndre Ayton coaching hire and pick, he is at that point brought in as the GM. They're all ousted. He brings in Monty Williams. That worked out pretty well, even if he got fired. He gets the Suns roster built that starts getting exciting with that bubble run. Then they make the trade for Chris Paul, gets into the finals, wins executive of the year that year when they won the finals. When they made it to the finals. Very much did not win. And he is now still the president basketball ops. So he's continued to tinker. He's got his finals nemesis, Kevin Durant, on the team now. We'll see what can do. We'll see what adds to the legacy of James Jones. But there is no question what a legacy it already is. The birth of a legend in Miami, the opportunity that he sees from maybe the most like horrific black eye the league has ever had. And then just this like ahead of its time, sweet shooting from the arc, totally unequal and yet still somehow so equal in other ways partnership with one of the greatest players of all time. James Jones, one hell of a guy. That's my case this week.
I do like it. Once you had your intro, like I saw me and Diaz, our eyes lit up at the exact same time because we knew who exactly you were going to say. And I do like me some James Jones or LeBron James Jones to, keep with the theme. It is interesting.
Well, let's be clear. We're not voting on LeBron James Jones. I don't want James Jones to steal any valor here. That was an era of his life. It's just James Jones.
It's difficult when the topic is running mates and you're tying them intrinsically together, but also still voting on just one individual. But I did like the James Jones story, and I do like my headcanon of James Jones as the weed guy for LeBron.
Some teams need a glue guy, some teams need a weed guy.
¿Por qué no los dos?
¿Por qué no los dos?
Call Lito. He could get you. He could be the glue guy in both ways.
It does speak to it that James Jones was most likely out of the NBA if LeBron didn't say to Cleveland, "Hey, he comes with me."
This is my favorite player of all time. I need him on my roster.
I mean, it speaks to A, the power that LeBron wields, but then also B, the strength of that relationship and that friendship that they developed.
Well, it's time for us to, speaking of Los Dos, get to the other two guys that we have this week.
So I took this in a bit of a different direction, but not a crazy different direction. It's still about a guy who is intrinsically linked with another guy, but I wanted to talk about essentially the parts of a Olympic rivalry that was the talk of the nation in the early 90s. Pretty much not remembered at all now, but I think it's worth bringing up because there was a time when the winner of the decathlon was considered the world's greatest athlete. And currently, I'm not sure that anyone on this podcast or anyone who listens to it could name the current decathlon Olympic gold medalist, unless James is Googling it right now. So instead, I want to go back in time and talk about Dan O'Brien.
The namesake of the quarterback award.
Well, isn't that
Davey O'Brien?
Davey O'Brien.
Davey O'Brien. Right.
But,
no, it's actually Davey O'Brien.
Dan O'Brien.
I understand he was much like the Damian Warner of his day. Is that what I'm to understand?
You know what? James did give us the current Canadian Olympic decathlon winner, but that's only because Ashton Eaton retired, who had won the previous two, who was American, because Americans are very good at the decathlon historically. But back to Dan O'Brien. Dan O'Brien was born in Portland, Oregon, 1966. He did not know his parents. All he knows is that his mother was Finnish and his father's African American, but they immediately put him up for adoption. And when he was 2, he was adopted by Jim and Virginia O'Brien, an Irish-American couple who lived in Klamath Falls, which is a small town near the California border. The O'Briens essentially had like a big foster family. Dan O'Brien had 7 siblings. 6 of those siblings, including Dan, were adopted. He had 2 Korean sisters, a Cherokee sister, and a Hispanic brother, and then a couple white birth siblings of the actual O'Briens. Dan attended Henley High School, where he quickly became a member of the track and field team. And he led this small town team to a runner-up finish at the state championships, where he won 4 individual gold medals in the 110-meter hurdles, the 300-meter hurdles, the long jump, and the 100-meter dash. After high school, O'Brien attended the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. Unfortunately, he did flunk out due to some personal issues, which included untreated ADD, alcohol problems, and a couple days in jail for writing bad checks. The Eugene Register later
Who
wrote,
among us?
quote, "He majored in pot and booze." Diaz probably should have saved the Who Among Us for that one, but... So, after 3 years of graduating high school, O'Brien had yet to actually be eligible to compete due to academic rules, but he did find a way to stay in the college dorm for free and eat for free while not a student. But eventually, they did have campus police physically kick him out of the dorm, and he went to go live by himself, doing odd jobs for money. His college coach, Mike Keller, reaches out to him, and he's like, "You have too much talent to live like this." And he helps him transfer into Spokane Falls Community College for a year. During that year, he becomes the Northwest Athletic Association of Community Colleges decathlon champion, and kind of gets his alcohol issues and everything figured out, and is able to transfer back to the University of Idaho. Although they almost didn't let him in because he had some significant debts from when the school discovered he had been freeloading that they wanted him to pay off first before they let him come back to school. He eventually got a part-time job at the University of Idaho golf course in order to pay them back for it, but he was able to come back to school. While at school, he does get a chance to compete in the U.S. Olympic trials in 1988, but gets injured in the long jump and has to withdraw. So, back at school, still working on his degree, still working part-time at the golf course, and in 1990, he returns to major competition at the Goodwill Games, and he finishes second, behind a man named Dave Johnson, who at the time was considered one of the best decathletes in the world. O'Brien had started well, but faltered on day 2 when he had to compete in what is generally considered his worst events, pole vault and javelin throw. But still, it was a pretty positive showing for O'Brien's first international event. After another year of training, still in Idaho, he gets a second shot at Johnson in the 1991 World Championships in Tokyo. This time he leaves no doubt. He wins the 100-meter, the long jump, the 400-meter, the 110-meter hurdles, and the pole vault to win the gold medal by 270 points, which is about the same difference as the margin between second and sixth. Johnson fails the pole vault and the 1500 and finishes a disappointing 21st. At this point, even with Johnson's disappointing showing in the World Championships, the two of them are considered the favorites for gold at the 92 Barcelona Olympics. And because of that, they get a call from Reebok. So Reebok had recently lost a lot of market share to Nike, and they had a plan. They thought that, hey, we're going to bring back the decathlon as a big thing because, back during the times of the then Bruce Jenner, decathlon was really popular. And Reebok thought we may have something here. So they unveiled a new campaign called Dan and Dave, which they initiated during Super Bowl 26. Over a series of television spots, Reebok featured the same message, quote, "Who will be the world's greatest athlete, Dan or Dave?" to be settled this summer in Barcelona. This 8-month marketing blitz, which has never been replicated for Olympic sports since then, and which cost nearly $30 million, made O'Brien and Johnson, who despite their previous successes were still relatively unknown, household names, to the point where, in a later retrospective, they described how the ads made it so that they would go to track meets and spend more time signing autographs than competing, and that it led to them getting sponsorships with Ray-Ban, Versace, Visa, Oakley, etc. It's all leading up to these Olympic trials, which they're supposed to cruise to. At these trials, Reebok hands out fans and hats that have either Dan or Dave on them. And usually these are pretty sparsely attended things, but there are nearly 20,000 fans in the stadium for these Olympic trials. Starts off well. They both cruise through day 1, and then you get to the pole vault, the 8th event. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with pole vault, but you can choose to pass on heights until you actually want to start competing. Dan passes the first 4 heights, but then he hits the bar on his first attempt. And then he hits the bar on his second attempt. Then he panics a bit and completely fails his third attempt. And he drops from first place to 11th place and misses out on the spot at the Olympics. This failure...
Twitter would have fucking eviscerated him.
It was bad.
I
This-
want Stephen A. Smith to comment on that.
Dan O'Brien blew a 7-event lead.
Pretty much. This failure caused massive uproar because Reebok had been promoting him real hard. And they had to quickly pivot and create new ads that were based around Dan cheering on Dave.
I mean, what the U.S. Olympic Committee needed at this point, like, if they ran it like David Stern ran the NBA, I don't care what those qualification times said. Dan O'Brien is competing in the Olympics. If you're the person that deserved the spot, sorry, you gotta go. And
10 people are getting some really weird suspensions.
I think they have like some sort of flexibility now for like at least I know they did this for ice skating last time where they didn't bring the top 3 finishers because there was someone who I think finished like 4th or 5th, but like had won a bunch of things during the year and like, yeah, you are overall more deserving than the person who finished in 3rd. But I don't think they had the ability to do this at that point. But yeah, so Dave, Olympics, Dan, not. They had like 10 ads pre-made that they had to can, and like they had to quickly bring them in to film 3 more that were just based on Dan supporting Dave. Get to the Olympics. Dave gets a stress fracture in his left foot and is essentially told he can't compete. He says, fuck you, doctors, and gets a shoe 2 sizes bigger for his left foot and just straps it as heavily as possible with tape. And he's not feeling his best, but Dave does at least finish 3rd and get the bronze. So it's not a total failure. Not what they expected. It feels like a failure based on, especially like on how heavily they campaigned for this. Dan and Dave don't really think so as much. Like Dan says, like everyone says it's a failure, but how much more would they have gotten out of it if I had both made the team? Like maybe a USA Today ad for the winner, but like nobody got fired when I didn't make the team, and it still brought them, viewers. And Dave said it wasn't a failure because we helped them sell the shoe that they wanted to sell anyway. It was disappointing for me personally because Dan wasn't there. I didn't get to compete against him, but like still brought attention.
Is it a great look for those shoes that Dave Johnson broke his foot in it, presumably?
I'm sure they didn't advertise the fact that he broke his foot in that shoe, but I will say they do both leave for Nike like a year later.
Oh, that's great.
So, not the best for Reebok, but again, there's a reason why no one has replicated this 8-month lead-in to the Olympics when you don't have a 100% guarantee that the athletes will actually compete in the Olympics. So I understand why it's kind of fallen by the wayside. But this isn't the end of the story because Dave now battling some injuries and in his 30s start to fall off. But Dan, he's still young and he has some shit to prove, as Diaz would say. So in the fall of 1992, just a month or so after the Olympics, Dan sets a world record in the decathlon at a meet in France, becoming the first American to hold the world record since the aforementioned Jenner in the 70s. He then goes on to win the next 2 world championships in 93 and 95 for a total of 3 gold medals in a row in the Worlds. So once again, going into the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, Dan is considered the favorite for the gold. This time he has no slip-ups in the trials and is ready for the full competition. He has a steady first day. He finishes 2nd in the 100, 4th in the long jump, 1st in the 400. Second day going into his tougher events, he tries to take it a little easier, not push himself too far, go for the steady, if not spectacular. Doesn't finish in the top like 3 or 4 for any of those events, but it's still enough. Even off of his best pace, he scores 8,824 points, which is over 100 more than Frank Busemann of Germany. And Dan does win the gold medal at the 96 Olympics in the decathlon, making him the greatest athlete in the world. This is pretty much the end for Dan as well, because it's really hard to keep going in the decathlon too long because it is 10 different disciplines that are very hard for anyone to keep up with. But he does get Dan O'Brien Day back in Moscow, Idaho, which is set on August 18th. And Dan was quick to note to the crowd that there will never be school on Dan O'Brien Day, which is both fun and ironic for a guy who it took him till he was like 29 to graduate. So he did spend a lot of time in school, although not doing schoolwork, but I can definitely see why he would enjoy that. And, even without being able to continue competing, his legacy is pretty much sealed. University of Idaho names their track and field complex after him. Again, pretty funny because they actively kicked him out once, and then they renamed where he trained after him. He gets inducted into the Oregon Sports Hall of Fame in 2005, alongside Dave Johnson. He also gets inducted into the National Track and Field Hall of Fame in 2006 and the U.S. Olympics Hall of Fame in 2012. And maybe more importantly, he did later go on to break the world record for the fastest game of hopscotch in 2009 at 81 seconds. The perfect random playground game for a decathlete.
I mean, that's impressive.
How do you finish hopscotch? I thought you just kind of fucking jump your way across.
There's like tasks you have to do in hopscotch.
You have to like throw beanbags on squares and pick the beanbags up from the squares without using those particular squares while completing full laps of it. There's like a full game.
Yeah.
Like just the hopscotch sorry that this is random knowledge that I have. The hopscotch just playing on the fields is like if you go on a tennis court and just throw a ball back and forth.
Yeah, so he did the real hopscotch.
I've never been more ashamed to be who I am as a person than I am right in this
moment. I'm very proud that this story that God did not want me to record ends with James knowing the rules to hopscotch.
It's elite. I thought it was just squares with numbers.
You know what? But we can segue from this children's game that the world's greatest athlete set a world record in after having a world record in the actual hardest thing to get a world record in, to something a little more serious. Diaz, I would love to know what you have today.
Well, a serious gives it the idea that there's some kind of tragic twist, but like I want to talk about victory and I want to talk about overcoming and I want to talk about the most literal interpretation of what James put forward this week. So James said running mates, and I instantly said I was taking endurance sports. And I instantly knew exactly where I was going with this one. James, you set me up even better when you were kind of teasing the category. You said the idea of a running mate is someone who is there to take somebody across the finish line. And that's exactly what my pair today did. This is a pair that crossed that finish line a total of 1,130 times together in various endurance race competitions. Among these races, they completed 97 half marathons, 72 marathons, 32 of those being the Boston Marathon, their hometown race. Along the way, they also complete 257 triathlons, with 6 of those being the infamous gauntlet that is the Ironman triathlon. This duo is unparalleled in sports history, and I'm thrilled to talk about the father-son pair of Dick and Rick Hoyt today.
All right, well played.
Listeners,
well played.
I wish you could have seen
played,
James' face while Diaz was doing that intro.
Well played, sir.
Well, again, by the most literal definition, there is no more prolific or successful pair.
You could not possibly be more correct. My goodness.
So some people may already know about this story. I want to at least hopefully provide a little more background to it. It's truly the most inspirational story, I think, in the history of sports. So first of all, we start with father, Dick Hoyt. Richard Hoyt was born June 1st, 1940 in Winchester, Massachusetts. He was the 5th of 10 children to Alfred and Anna Hoyt. He would grow up in North Reading, Boston, which is just about 20 miles outside of Boston. I just said Boston. Grew up in North Reading, Massachusetts, which is just about 20 miles outside of Boston. While he was there, was already quite the athlete. He was only 5'7", but that didn't stop him from playing on the basketball and baseball teams. And he was also the captain of the football team at North Reading High. If we were to make a stereotypical 50s sitcom about North Reading High School. What do you think the football captain is doing in his spare time?
Is he perhaps dating the head cheerleader?
He is dating the head cheerleader. Judith Ann Layton is the head cheerleader at North Reading High. And they're truly just the most beautiful, sickening display of that classic high school couple that everybody loves and they love each other. In fact, their high school yearbook would even say that, quote, Richie and Judy are like coffee and tea. One without the other, you rarely will see. Dropping bars.
Please tell me they were prom king and queen. I have to assume that's the case, but do you have the information?
That is not confirmed in any article I was able to find. I can
This
only
is an
assume
enormous
so.
knock against your case that you did not confirm this. It's a huge demerit.
I can't confirm nor deny. There's no references in any of my research, but they love each other. They're, these crazy kids. They want this beautiful life together. They get married not long after graduating high school. Dick wants to find a job that can keep him well employed, but also keep him close to home. So he enlists in the Army National Guard. After a couple years, he would transfer over to the Air National Guard. There was a base not far from where they went to high school. And he would spend his entire working life working for the Air National Guard. In 1961, after they've been married, Judy gets pregnant. They are thrilled that their first child is on the way. And on January 10th, 1962, Richard Jr., Rick Hoyt, is born in Holland, Massachusetts. Rick's birth was a complicated one. In the process of delivery, the umbilical cord got wrapped around his neck, which cut off the oxygen flow to his brain. They were ultimately able to successfully deliver Rick, but after some time running tests and with Rick being in the ICU, they do diagnose him with profound cerebral palsy.
Fun fact, this is why I was a cesarean section, because that was going to happen to me.
Hey, birth is scary and very difficult, and the U.S. has one of the highest rates of maternal mortality, so it's not just, oh, you should have kids. It's like a life-altering thing that could easily kill you.
You can do everything right, and inevitably complications can arise. It can be dangerous for the mother. It can be dangerous for the child. In this instance, it was very dangerous for Rick. He is a paraplegic as a result of this asphyxiation that happened at his birth. He is not in control of any of his limbs. The only two things that he can do is he can move his head left to right a little bit, up and down a little bit, and he's in control of his eyes. While the physical diagnoses were easy to make, doctors were also very adamant with the Hoyt family that, look, with the amount of time that he had the blood flow cut off, this hasn't just affected him physically. This has definitely affected him cognitively. There's really no way he'll ever be able to lead any kind of meaningful life. I hate this term, but the term that the doctors used was vegetable. They thought that Rick would not be much more than just that. The Hoyt parents said, fuck all that. That's absolute madness. That's insanity, what you're trying to say to us right now. They said, we're going to bring Rick home. We're going to raise him just like any other kid, because he's just like any other kid. And they were also inspired by the fact that Rick's eyes very clearly had something going on in them when they were talking to him. They would follow him around the room. These parents say that they know their kid best. They say there's a full person in there, and they bring Rick home. And when I say they want to raise him just like any other kid, this is truly, they're raising him just like any other kid. Rick has a wheelchair that he uses to get along. They would tape a hockey stick to the wheelchair so that he could play hockey with the neighborhood kids. The Hoyts have nothing but great things to say about everybody in the neighborhood. They said the kids, the families, always made Rick feel as involved as they possibly could. And it's not just the athletics, which, Dad is mostly focused on. I also just want to talk about Judy for a little bit, because Judy is a fucking rock star in her own right. Judy was just as much of an advocate for Rick as Dick was, while Dick was more focused in athletic pursuits, making sure his son was involved socially. Judy wanted to make sure that Rick had access to an equal education. 60s, 70s, not a great time for people with disabilities in America. Institutions are very often recommended. Essentially, society is trying to cast these people off into a side where we don't need to think about them. We don't need to involve them. Terrible, dark stain in our history. But Because of the efforts of people like Judy, it's no longer like that. When it was time for Rick to start kindergarten, she enrolled him at the local school. Kindergarten was on the first floor. No issues there. Rick can attend class. First grade was up on the second floor. And so when Judy said, all right, well, so how are we going to accommodate Rick? How is he going to get to class? They were basically saying it's time for you to, transfer Rick. You got to put him in a school for children with disabilities. And, basically throw in a room where some of these kids have physical disabilities, some of these kids have cognitive disabilities. Just lump them all together, throw them in a room, let's forget about them. Again, Judy says, that's bullshit. We're not doing that with my son. She helps to draft legislation which ultimately passes in Massachusetts, which guarantees that anybody from the age of 3 to 22 should have access to as best of an education as they want, basically. This would later serve as the basis for a similar law to be passed nationally. And when we get to 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act is passed, with Judy Hoyt being one of the biggest public advocates for it. So truly, starting at her local level all the way up to the first and best bill to be passed for people with disabilities in our country, Judy Hoyt saw all that out from conception to passing. We have a lot of work to go still. We would not be in the spot we are now for Americans with disabilities if it were not for Judy Hoyt. But enough about all that nerd stuff of getting an education and whatnot. We're here to talk about sports. Throughout Rick's life, again, his parents are very adamant that he is cognitively there. He has no disabilities cognitively. If we provide him with the correct resources, he's no different than anybody else. And essentially, the family has just annoyed the shit out of doctors for this long enough that finally, when they hear about this new computer that's being developed at Tufts University, which allows people who become paraplegic later in life to communicate, they finally convince somebody that says, look, if you can raise $5,000, we'll create a chair for him and we'll see if he's able to communicate.
American healthcare. Annoy people enough until they give you what you want for also still an exorbitant amount of money.
Well, and also they had to raise the money themselves. So this GoFundMe culture that we have today, don't worry, it's been around for a long, long time. But thankfully, they raised the money. They're able to outfit a specific chair for Rick. And when Dick and Judy are taking Rick to the appointment and then the time leading up to it, they're taking bets. What's Rick's first words going to be? And it's the same as it might be for just about any other set of parents. Dick's saying he's going to say, hi, Dad. Judy's saying it's going to be hi, Mom. His younger brothers are insisting it's going to be something for them. And it's 1974 at the time. And he says what any Boston kid is going to say. 2 words, go Bruins. It was his first 2 words ever said was go Bruins. And the way Dick says it is this confirms so many things at once. Yes, our son can communicate. Not only can our son communicate, when we've been watching all these hockey games together, he has been not just watching it, but he fully gets what's happening. Go Bruins. Enjoys it. Fully confirms everything that they've ever thought. Their son is fully there. And the only unfortunate part of this story is that the Bruins do lose the 74 Stanley Cup final to the Philadelphia Flyers.
How dare you, Diaz?
If I could go back in time, I would change this one around.
No, you wouldn't.
But, I mean, look, let's be real. Rick Hoyt already got to see the Bruins win a couple cups by that point.
Exactly. Don't try to act magnanimous. You would never give up any Philadelphia championships.
I mean, especially to Boston. But if I was going to give them up to any pair of Bostonians, I'd give it up to Rick and Dick Hoyt. But with this revelation, with this communication breakthrough, a whole new world's opened up to Rick. They enroll him at a local school. At first, it's just on a 1-year provisional basis. Again, this is something that inspired Judy to say, fuck a 1-year provision. I want a law that protects my child. Rick would go on not just to graduate from high school. In 1993, he would graduate from Boston University with a degree in special education, which he would use to help further developments to assist in communication for those who need assistance with that. But again, enough with all this nerd shit. I'm not here to talk about school. I'm here to talk about competition. I'm here to talk about sports. I'm here to talk about 2 guys that are the best pair of running mates of all time. That story starts in 1977. Rick is 15, fully a part of his high school community at this point. And unfortunately, there's a tragedy at the high school. One of his classmates who played lacrosse suffered an accident, which would leave the lacrosse player paraplegic. And Rick wanted to be an inspiration to his classmate to show, like, look, you may think that this is the end of your life. You can still live an incredibly fulfilling life. So Rick, when he got home from school, said to his dad, there's this race coming up. I want to run in it. And Dick's like retired at this point, way out of shape, but his son wants him to do it. So of course he's going to do it. So they have this 5-mile benefit race for the classmate. Dick is just struggling through the whole thing, but he gets to the finish line. And when they get home, they strap Rick back in his chair to help him communicate. And he says to his dad, when I'm running, it feels like my disability disappears. At this point, this is not going to be the only race that this couple runs together. This is like Dick Hoyt's purpose in life now is to run these races with his son, Rick. So Dick gets very serious with his physical fitness, gets very serious with his training. Not only are they doing training runs together almost every day, but while Rick's in school, Dick is strapping up about 80 pounds of cement to the front of a chair and pushing that so that he can just further develop his fitness, further simulate the effect of running with Rick.
I love that.
Well, it's such an important part of his training. I'll get more to it later, but he maintains throughout. I would never run any of these races without Rick. If you asked me to, I would go slower. I guarantee I would not perform as well. And very quickly, like, Dick notices how competitive Rick is, because anytime they're out there, it's not just enough to run the race. Rick wants to win. And this is inspiring Dick on. And because of that competitive streak, that's why they're spending just about every single weekend competing in some kind of race. Sometimes it's a 5K, sometimes it's a 10K, sometimes it's just a 1 mile, but they're competing every single weekend. And they're building up distances longer and longer and longer until in 1980, after 3 years of doing this, they do their first marathon together. They run in the Boston Marathon. They would compete in the Boston Marathon together almost every single year, with one notable exception. There's 1 year that in the training leading up to the Boston Marathon, Dick suffers a heart attack. And for a time, it doesn't look like it's going to end up well for him, but he does ultimately survive and make a full recovery. What the doctors basically said to Dick was, the only reason your body survived this massive of a heart attack is because you are in like the top fucking 0.01% of physical fitness. If you weren't absurdly in shape, there was no way you were going to make this.
See, this is why I bike all the time, so that if something terrible happens, I will just overcome it. Also, wait, real quick clarification. You said the 1980 Boston Marathon.
That was the first Boston Marathon that they ran together.
You know that's the same one as Rosie Ruiz, right?
Oh my God, was it really?
Wait, back to the healthcare thing I brought up earlier. Even being in the 0.01 top percent of health, you could still get a heart attack and almost die. And I'm sure it costs a lot of money. Yes, James, as you are well aware, there's a difference between dying and almost dying.
Again, like, this is, we're thrilled that Dick survives, but Dick gets emotional talking about the fact that the only reason he survived this heart attack was because of his fitness. Because again, this is something he had no interest in ever doing again until Rick said, hey, I want to do this run for my classmate. So truly, like, Dick would not have survived. Dick would not be alive if it was not for Rick pushing Dick on to say, hey, we need to keep running. Obviously, that kind of inspiration is going to keep somebody going, and it makes this duo inseparable. Now, there's a lot of people out there that do want to separate them, not for any kind of animus towards Rick, no negative feelings towards that, but just simply trying to explain to Dick, you're like really fucking good at this now, man. The best marathon that they ever ran together was in 1990 when they completed a marathon in 2 hours and 40 minutes. To break that down for you, that is a 6-minute and 11-second pace for the entire marathon that they run. The world record at the time was 2 hours and 6 minutes. So they're only like 34 minutes off of the world record. And if we had a time machine and we dropped them off in 1909, they would be the world record holders in the marathon.
It's just a little bit of what Rosie Ruiz convinced people briefly that she had run it in. She had 2:31.
That would be amazing if even their best real time was better than her best fake time. I wish.
I was hoping when I checked. I am the bearer of bad news with that.
But still, I mean, that's fucking bonkers. Like, I bet that most people recording this podcast / listening to this podcast could not do 1 mile in 6 minutes and 11 seconds. And they're out here pushing through this. And like the other thing that is just really important to emphasize, it's so easy to have the mindset that this is just an incredible physical achievement for Dick and, whatever, Rick's just along for the ride. The elements aren't fucking easy in a lot of these races, okay? Rick is pushing through as well. At any point, Rick could say to Dick, like, Dad, it's too hot. I can't continue. But Rick's out here pushing through as well.
I would honestly even be more concerned about the cold than the heat, because it's one of those times like you're not going to get any body movement like giving you warmth through all of that, really.
Right? Yeah, the cold ones
not
are
to like sound like a dick or anything, but he's not getting any blood flow from running.
Well, and then you're also getting the wind in the face.
Like he's still getting all the worst parts of being in a cold marathon.
I'm sure you can get some adrenaline from that, though, regardless.
Well, I mean, and he definitely does. And one thing that Dick always says is like, there's times when we're out there together, like if I'm struggling, he just like Rick is very nonverbal for the most part, usually doesn't make many sounds. But when they're running together, like if Rick can sense that Dick needs that extra push, he's going to give some verbal encouragement. And like Dick, anytime he talks about that sound, he tears up and he says it's the most beautiful sound in the world. And who wouldn't run harder in that circumstance? But Rick is a competitive guy. Rick's not going to be satisfied with just this fucking running on land shit. So at some point, he says, how about we start competing in triathlons? Now, this is going to be a problem for Dick for 2 reasons. First of all, he hasn't ridden a bike since he was a child. And second of all, he never learned how to swim.
Those are 2 pretty big problems.
2/3 of the events of a triathlon are major difficulties for Dick to get up to speed with. And part of it too is not just figuring how am I going to swim? It's how am I going to properly align a harness to make sure that I'm A, keeping Rick safe, and B, also like efficiently moving him along as well.
It's not how am I going to swim? It's how are we going to swim?
Exactly. It's a multi-pronged problem. But he learns it and he figures it out. And just as it was with the first 5-mile race not being enough, shorter triathlons aren't enough to quench Rick's competitiveness. And they keep building up until eventually they enter into the infamous Ironman triathlon. Now, for the uninitiated, an Ironman triathlon consists of, first, a 2.4-mile swim. You have 2 hours, 20 minutes to complete this part. And if you can't finish it in that time, sorry, your day's already done. We're going to follow that up with a 112-mile bike ride. You have about 8 hours to complete this part of it. And if you get through that, then you need to finish it off with a 26.2 complete marathon run.
James can do the bike ride part.
So here's the thing. I've never done 112. And the last time I tried to do more than 100, 107, I threw up. And I didn't do it in under 8 hours, I don't think.
And I would venture to guess you had not just swam 2.4 miles when you did that.
Exactly. That was my next bit.
Well, now you have something to train for.
I mean, it's an incredible mountain to try to climb. But in 1988, Rick and Dick Hoyt decided that they wanted to climb this mountain. And the other part to mention too is so like Ironman triathlons have become a much bigger thing recently. They're competed in multiple locations. This iteration was when it was the only one being done, and it was being competed in Hawaii in the middle of the summer. So like unforgivable levels of heat beating down on you the whole time too.
I am glad that the Great Pacific Challenge did not exist at this time for them to decide to get to Hawaii for the Ironman that way.
Could you imagine? I'll tell you what, I don't know if Dick Hoyt ever learned shit about paddle boats, but I bet he would have won. They would have won, I should say, excuse me. Because again, competing together, this first year in 1988, unfortunately, they aren't able to complete. They miss one of the time markers, and you got to wait a whole nother year until they come back in 1989. And this time, with a time of 14 hours and 26 minutes, they do successfully cross the line with a full hour and a half to spare. They could have pulled up 50 meters short, pulled up a nice, tight 80-minute comedy, had a few laughs, and then finished the race. This is an incredible achievement. And it's only made more incredible when you remember that they did this 5 more times. They, in total, completed 6 Ironman triathlons together. Remarkable stuff. The competing in and completing of the Ironmans, as far as we look at impressiveness of their athletic achievements, this is about the peak. They continue racing for many more years, though.
But they're just kind of like stat compiling now.
Exactly. Like they're just getting more XP, leveling up. The 2013 Boston Marathon was set to be the final Boston Marathon that they would run together. You might remember some horrible shit happened at the 2013 Boston Marathon. They were about a mile from the finish line when the bombs went off. Everybody totally fine, totally safe. They loaded up into a van. They got a ride back to the local Marriott hotel where they were staying, and they were fine. But much like when Mariano Rivera blew out his knee, he wasn't going to go out like that. The Hoyts weren't going to go out like that either. So they did come back in 2014 to run one last Boston Marathon together. They would still do more races together, but at this point, Dick is about 72, I believe. He's getting up there. Marathons aren't quite his speed anymore, so they'll just do the shorter races. But Rick Hoyt, in the meantime, must have felt like Dara Torres because he had some more shit to prove. Rick Hoyt would complete 5 more Boston Marathons, this time with the assistance of Brian Lyons, who would push him in the Boston Marathon from 2015 through 2019. Unfortunately, Brian Lyons passed away in June of 2020. We do now enter the death part of our presentation. I'm sad to report.
I like that you started with one that wasn't even the 2 main characters.
Here's a third death just for you.
We'll throw in a bonus death there. Dick, again, had that massive heart attack that he only survived because he was in such great shape. It is eventually congestive heart failure, which he succumbs to on March 17th, 2021. Rick was still in very good health at the time. Unfortunately, it was just this past May 22nd at the age of 61. Rick did pass away. But we can look at this optimistically. We can look at it the same way that their family does. Rick's brother, Russ, said when Rick passed away, I'd like to think they're both up there together now, and Dad's sitting in the chair. Rick's finally getting his turn to push. So a beautiful legacy that they leave behind, which is not just the inspiration of their racing. There's also Team Hoyt, which has several chapters which exist today. Team Hoyt was originally founded alongside with Judy. Essentially, they are set up for 2 main purposes. The first is to connect runners of various distances with different people with disabilities who would like to compete in these races. They make these connections, and they also help to sell the specific wheelchairs that will be best used in a race like this. So the Team Hoyt legacy continues to live on. There are many now that are able to follow in the footsteps because of their foundation. However, I put forth that there will never in the history of competitive athletics be a pair of running mates like Dick and Rick Hoyt.
Yeah, hard to see that
it's a
being
pretty
topped.
compelling case. Look, let's not be so hasty. Let's take a moment to be judicious as the tribunal, as is appropriate for us to do, and really think through this. With James Jones, I will admit that I had some ulterior motives in trying to bridge into this new season. I wanted to gather a lot of the past archetypes from in the past, particularly last week, like a bag getter, a glue guy, going back to like when we had our front seats to greatness. And, the 2003 draft, like we said, it's an all-timer. It felt perfect to try and bring someone from it that is tied for the second most titles in that 2003 draft class with Dwayne Wade. And just a little fun fact about the rivalry between LeBron James and James Jones because they didn't always play together. There was some time they spent apart. While that was going on, he faced James Jones 11 times. Do you guys want to guess what the record was between these two?
11-0.
I'm gonna say
Yes.
8-3 Jones.
It is 6-5 in favor of LeBron James. LeBron James does win out. However, James Jones in these 11 games, not a great plus minus, -10. LeBron James, -11. Who was carrying who to those 7 finals trips? When there was one set of footprints, that is where James Jones picked up LeBron's James. And also, like, if we don't do the Hoyts, I will go straight to hell. So I do understand that.
Honestly, because like I was watching, and I can't. If this is the first time that you've heard of Dick and Rick Hoyt listening to this podcast, I implore you. This will be the only time I'll say this. Turn off our podcast right now. Go to YouTube, search Team Hoyt HBO Sports, watch the segment. It's a 12-minute segment, and I cried 4 different times watching it. Most fucking beautiful pair I've ever seen in athletics. Now, hopefully, you're tuned back into the podcast. Xavier, what are your thoughts?
It's so literal. It's hard to beat. As much as I feel like James and I both took it ways that, it makes sense for the topic. And I liked both of the stories. I liked the James Jones story. I liked the Dan and Dave story. But the Hoyt story is it's just so beautiful and like one of the best representations of what sports can be, or any sort of athletics can be. It's really hard to go against it. Diaz trying to tug at the heartstrings here, and he's doing a good job.
I mean, like, as far as me winning, this is too much of a layup. And I would agree with you. Like, it was literally the second you said it, James. The second you said it, it was the first thing that came to mind. I was like, freaking Dick Hoyt, they're running mates.
I do want to give some credit to Xavier for also a very good literal interpretation of this. Dan O'Brien was great. This fucking Animal House dude who I didn't realize the extent to which he fumbled this bag quite so massively. I knew he failed out. I didn't know the pole vaulting circumstances of it. The one biggest issue I think I have with Dan O'Brien as I thought through it, he is the more successful of that pair. Like, Dave Johnson almost feels like more of the running mate to Dan O'Brien because Dan O'Brien goes on to get gold and has like several golds. And Dave's best finish was that bronze in 92?
Yeah, I mean, running mates, I wasn't thinking too much of who was the better one of it, but like in the terms of like the main campaign that linked them together, Dan did end up having to film ads cheering on Dave instead because he fucked up.
That is pretty good. And this is just based on my own arbitrary interpretation. But again, I do not have a piece of coal for a heart, so we're going with Hoyt. Now, there is one further question. Are we going with a particular Hoyt?
So, to me, I think that if you were to ask either of them if they would like to come into our hall as a single inductee, they would be like, that's them calling right now. And they're saying, you guys are fucking insane if you think either one of us will go into your hall individually. They need to go in together.
Okay, this is just housekeeping now. Am I making 1 plaque or 2 plaques? Are they a unit?
It's a unit.
This is Rick and Dick Hoyt being inducted, not Rick Hoyt and Dick Hoyt.
Yes, this is Rick and Dick Hoyt. They must go in together. They must share the same plaque. I don't think they would want to have it any other way.
Then Diaz, I would have it no other way than for you to bring them on in.
Well, we've inducted a lot of people on different parts of the morality scale, let's say, in the history of our great podcast. We've inducted some not so great guys. We've inducted some good guys. We've inducted some great guys. But dare I say, I don't think we've ever inducted some heroic guys. And I think we have 2 genuine heroes of the Boston community, of the marathon community, of the Ironman community, of the people who have a fucking pulse community. The greatest story to ever be produced, and perhaps their most impressive accomplishment, the only duo to ever make anybody root for something from Boston. Dick and Rick Hoyt, two of the greatest Boston marathoners of all time. Welcome to the Hall of Guy.
Welcome to the Hall of Guy. Though, again, to be fair, we should clarify that technically they had the second best finish in the Boston Marathon of the Hall of Guy.
We don't believe in asterisks here. If it was recorded, so it
We
is
brought
done.
her in now. She's got that time.
Before we wrap, there was just one other little funny thing. So
Sure.
they asked Dick when he retired from the Boston Marathon. He said, "Yeah, is there anything that feels a little weird about this?" Blah blah blah. And he said, "Look, I'm just glad I'm going to be at the finish line before Rick for once."
I hope he thought of that ahead of time and was really waiting for someone to set him up, because honestly, that's a great fucking dad line.
I mean, that's the thing. But sometimes the dad joke just comes to you. Sometimes you got to prepare it. But no, expect nothing less.
It's great to be kicking off another round of guys. I will go ahead and kick off another round of thanks, beginning with our thank you to producer Craig and the team behind him, and to musical director Don Ham, and most of all to you, dear listener. Hey, if you like the show, you can rate, review, you can share, you can do all those things, but you can also go ahead and join the Discord that we have put up, because Twitter will die at some point and we need a way to still share stupid sports shit. And we would like to share that stupid sports shit with you. It is fun. We don't get to talk about all of the stuff here that we three talk about constantly to make sure that we're on the same page, but we would love to share that. We are small but mighty. Feel free to come join. You can find all of that information in addition to our guys of the day and everything else that you could possibly want to hear from our voices at bit.ly/remember that guy, all one word, all lowercase. I have been James.
I've been the very special guest Xavier.
And I'm Diaz. And as the famous Bruce Springsteen song goes, we were born to guide.
National Lampoon presents the Dan O'Brien story.
I mean, he was in college pretty much as long as Val Kilmer, but we'll get to that.
That's Van Wilder, which does
Van
have
Wilder.
it does not have Val Kilmer in it. I was about to
Kilmer?
say that Van Wilder and Val
Why am I
Kilmer.
thinking Val Kilmer?
Cal
Am
Penn.
I just thinking of too much?
You're combining Cal Penn and Van Wilder into Val Kilmer. I don't know how you did it, but you did manage to do it.
I think I'm thinking about Top Gun for some reason. He was in Top Gun.
Yeah. So.
Well, I've been really wanting to go see the new Mission Impossible, so I was thinking of Tom Cruise movies earlier, and I was also thinking of Top Gun, and I was thinking about how I hadn't seen the new Top Gun yet, so I think that's where that came from. But regardless, Van Wilder.